I was running Vox Media Studios, and we produced over 50 television shows for Netflix and Hulu and Apple and Amazon and HBO, and a bunch of all nonfiction shows for the most part, but everything: true crime, food, explainer-y stuff, docs, and everything in between. And Full Swing was always my baby, and I ran the
Hmm.
studio. At one point, it was a pretty huge, pretty large team. And because I was the boss, I kind of kept that project on the slate. And my rule was always, if you had no updates on a project after 6 months, we pull it off the slate, which means, you can't use legal resources, you can't spend development money on it. The golf show never got off the slate.
Right. Just kind of
For,
hung around there.
for like 9 years, I just insisted on leaving it up. And how I guess I came to Full Swing was back when I was running the sort of digital media side of Vox. I was a part of this delegation in 2012 that went down to meet with the PGA Tour's sort of media team. They were looking to get smarter about reaching this like modern audience. At that
Right,
point,
right.
we reached millennials. And so
Of
they
course.
invited a couple of digital companies down to kind of meet with them and talk about like different things they could do maybe with their rights and storytelling. And obviously being a golf like nerd, I was like, I led that pitch. I put a whole bunch of content together. We actually created a couple sort of pilots of shows. And I remember like one of our sports journalists, like I was like, all right, there's this kid coming up. His name's Jordan Spieth. He's going to be a big
Yeah.
deal. We did like a video about Jordan Spieth and
Yeah.
Hunter McCann, which was really fun. But anyway, so we went down and met with the PGA Tour. Ultimately, they ended up passing on working with us, which was kind of funny. The two things we pitched to them was you should create a new sort of website and digital media brand that focuses on like a younger voice and
Hmm.
a little more irreverent and a little more playful, because online audiences want sort of more voice,
Right.
not sort of corporate badge. And then you should do a doc series like Hard Knocks that
Right.
follows players and lets them be human. And they said like no to both ideas.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
ironic because afterwards they started Scratch, which we
Of
now own.
course.
And
Right.
then obviously Full Swing is what
Right.
led to all of this. So in the course of getting to know them for that pitch process, I got to be pretty close with an exec there named Chris Wandell, who now runs
Hmm.
sort of media. He's the SVP of media and sales at the PGA Tour. And, he was like a junior exec at the time, but, he's also a golf nerd. And I think he appreciated like my deep takes on like J. Don Blake and all this,
Yeah.
Titans golfers that I
The
love.
deep cuts, yeah.
Exactly. And it was like, okay, this guy at the very least is like a fan, like a
Right.
real fan. And so I just kept in touch with them, and we'd get together like once a year and play golf, and I was just always looking for ways to work with the PGA Tour completely like as a fan. And then in 2019 we met up in Las Vegas during CES and played a round of golf out at Shadow Creek, and
Hmm.
he said, "Hey, that doc that we've been talking about for years, like we've got a new commissioner who's a lot more open to stuff like this. I think maybe we could give it a run." And
Yeah.
so over that sort of 18 hole round, we hashed out like the deal that became Full Swing, which was basically like if they were going to do it, I needed to have sort of full editorial control. We had to basically give it, warts and all. Like, they weren't going to be able to sanitize it. They had to be comfortable with the players sort of cussing.
Right.
And at that point, I built so much trust because they knew me that at that point that they said okay. And so, fast forward like 3 months, I met players. We end up signing this agreement with the PGA Tour, which gave me and Vox the sort of exclusive rights to go and try and develop and pitch this show. It was the first time the PGA Tour had ever really signed away those kind of rights to
Yeah,
anybody,
for sure.
which was huge. And then we started working on players, and obviously the PGA Tour couldn't help get players. They didn't want to play favorites, so it was sort of on us to go sign the players. So I started working on getting the first kind of batch of players signed up. And it took us about 6 months to get the first player deal done because we weren't going to pay them, and it was kind of like it was
Yeah.
just, hey, the access is like kind of at will, and so if you get sick of us, you can just tell us to leave, and we'll have to leave. I can't force you to be there, but on the same note, I can't pay you. And so it took a while to get it done, and ended up not finishing that first deal until about November of 2019. And so we thought it was too late to go try and sell the show and make it for 2020, which was like the best luck
Of
ever
course, yeah.
because of COVID. And
Sure.
so that gave us an entire year to kind of continue to work on the show while everyone was in the bubble. And then the big thing that happened was originally it was, as I said earlier, it was supposed to be like Hard Knocks.
Hmm.
That meant we only had PGA Tour rights, so we were going to do the first 12 weeks of the season, follow like 6 to 8 players, and have the episodes come out like Wednesday after the Sunday. So it would be like a
Okay.
quick. And then during COVID, that's really when Drive to Survive became really popular.
Yeah, yeah, definitely wanted to ask about that, sort of where that fits in the timeline and and all of that. So yeah, that's love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I think season one of Drive was in 2019, but it didn't really become like a global hit until 2020.
Yeah,
And that was like it also season two, I think, came out like right after the lockdown started. So it was just like everyone was watching it because everyone had nothing else to do but
yeah,
watch.
like yeah, I remembered it as like a pandemic phenomenon, but I wasn't sure if that was, the
It
right kind of
definitely,
time.
yeah, season two was when it became a pandemic phenomenon. So anyway, so that kind of like opened up this idea that brought Netflix to the conversation all of a sudden because they had this kind of unexpected hit show
Right.
and they thought, okay, well, these kind of more niche sports, there's maybe like more to do here. So we met with Netflix and I had already made a bunch of shows for them. So we had a great, great Netflix relationship. And they basically said, look, it's only going to work if we can do the whole season, which means you have to get the majors on board. And so that started this whole other process of like trying to, open the door to having these conversations. Our first round of meetings were with we started with Augusta because it was kind of like, if we felt like if we could get Augusta on board,
Right.
then we could probably get everybody else on board. And just doing these meetings at like 6 a.m. LA time on Zoom, like it was wild. And they said yes. And I think, I don't know why they said yes. I think partly it was because the golf had to come together anyway because of COVID. So, a lot of the five families of golf were
Sure.
sort of meeting more regularly because they had to realign the schedule and so, they've had periods of like really intense collaboration. They've had periods where they like don't get along and COVID was definitely like, let's try to get golf back,
Right. Yeah,
together
there was like
collectively.
a collective sort of effort there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
for
our
sure.
show kind of like became part of the discussion, which was great because all of a sudden they were all at the same table anyway, and they were all thinking about what's best for golf. And so, they all said yes, and then Netflix obviously, kind of came on board after that, and we expanded the scope from sort of 6 to 8 players to like 25, and I had to go like they gave me this list of players, and I had to get like 10 of them to say yes. It was like the final contingency in the deal for it to be greenlit. And actually, it was Brooks Koepka who was the final player to say yes that actually like tipped us over to
Oh
let
wow.
Netflix greenlight the show, which is ironic considering like that his storyline from season one. But then that tipped us over and we started production and then I guess kind of the rest is history. It was I remember showing up the first ever shoot we did for Full Swing season one was at Tiger's event at the Hero World Challenge. This would have been 2021, I believe, maybe late 2020. Yeah, it was probably 21. Anyway, no, yeah, 2020. And we went and rented the studio, and it was the first time all the players kind of came in and did their first rounds of interviews. And I remember Brooks actually was the only player who came without an agent or entourage. He showed up, drove himself over in a little golf cart, sat down in the chair, and just like bared his soul. And I was like, okay, well, we were onto something here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The other thing I don't want to like leave out is after Netflix got really interested, that's when we got introduced to Box, who are the producers of Drive to Survive. And so Netflix said, "Hey, we know you've made a bunch of shows for us, but this is your first sort of sports show like this. Would you be open to meeting with the Drive to Survive producers? We think you'd really get
Right,
along."
right.
There wasn't any pressure to bring them on, but they just said, "Hey, you should meet with them." And I had dinner with them in LA, James Gay Reese and Paul Martin, who are the founders of that company. And it really was eye-opening because they talked about the way they make sports stocks, and neither of them were really like big golf fans, but
Hmm.
they knew that like any sport, whatever the public perception of it is just so different from what it's like on the inside. And their whole feeling was like, look, if you can get the curtain open a little bit, you're going to be blown away, and audiences will be blown away because it's never like what it seems. And they actually really liked the idea that golf had this, public perception of being kind of stodgy and old and boring and like a rich guy sport. Because
Yeah,
they
a level of like sanitization or something, maybe even.
exactly. And like they've just made these shows for long enough and been around athletes long enough that they're like, we know it's not true. We know that like it's actually a good thing that people are going to come to this show potentially with that in mind
Right.
because it's very easy for us to subvert that in like the first 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and because they just know athletes are athletes and they're like they're not all rich kids and they're like they have diverse backgrounds and they like to have fun and it's a sexy lifestyle. So yeah, so they came on board. We partnered with them to make the show and they've been amazing partners and we've, I guess I would say sort of the rest is history.